Imagine a king so obsessed with his own body that he feared he might shatter. Or another who played with dolls at 2 a.m. while his empire waited. Welcome to the world of the 11 most bizarre kings in history. Rulers whose habits were so strange, so unhinged, they make modern celebrities look completely normal. You won't believe what they did with all the power, wealth, and authority at their disposal. If you think your boss or your neighbor is strange, wait until you hear what these kings did with their power. Which of these rulers do you think was the absolute craziest? The smell reached them before the king did. Thick, sour, and heavy, it filled the air like something rotten that had been left out too long. Courtiers learned to recognize it instantly because it meant the king was close. This was not the result of a battle, a disease spreading through the palace, or a body hidden somewhere nearby. This was simply how the ruler of a powerful kingdom lived every day. His presence was impossible to ignore, not because of his authority, but because of the stench, the decay, and the discomfort that followed him everywhere. And as shocking as that sounds, this king was far from the strangest one in history. In fact, compared to what you're about to hear, he was almost ordinary. History likes to paint kings as wise leaders, noble figures sitting on golden thrones, guiding their people with intelligence and grace. But when you strip away the crowns and titles, a very different picture appears. Give a human being unlimited power, endless wealth, and no consequences, and something strange happens. Reality starts to bend. Normal behavior fades. Personal habits turn into public disasters. These rulers were surrounded by people whose only job was to agree with them, protect their egos, and pretend nothing was wrong. Over time, the line between authority and insanity disappeared completely. What you're about to hear isn't rumor, myth, or exaggeration. These are real kings, real habits, and real moments recorded by historians. Some are disturbing, some are darkly funny, and some are downright horrifying. Together, they reveal an uncomfortable truth. Absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it transforms people into something unrecognizable. If you think your boss or your neighbor is strange, wait until you hear what these kings did with their power. Which of these rulers do you think was the absolute craziest? The first story eases us into the madness, because this king wasn't cruel or violent. He was simply convinced his own body could break. Charles VI of France genuinely believed he was made of glass. Not fragile like glass, literally glass. He lived every day terrified that one wrong movement, one careless touch, would cause him to shatter into pieces. To protect himself, he had iron rods sewn into his clothing so his body would stay intact. He refused to let anyone touch him. He avoided sitting down too fast, avoided leaning, avoided hugs, avoided life itself. Sometimes he stood frozen in place for hours, afraid that even moving might crack him. What made it worse was that this fear came and went. At times, Charles seemed perfectly aware, intelligent, and capable of ruling. Then suddenly, the delusion returned, and he no longer recognized himself, his family, or even his crown. Servants often had to remind him who he was and why people bowed to him. Imagine ruling France while needing to be reminded that you are the king. Strangely, people around him didn't treat this as shocking. Similar beliefs appeared among other nobles of the time. Scholars even gave it a name, calling it a form of deep melancholy caused by overthinking. In a world already filled with superstition, believing you were glass somehow made sense. Charles's story isn't funny. It's sad. A man trapped inside his own fear, surrounded by power he couldn't control. But compared to what comes next, this gentle madness is just the beginning. If you think your boss or your neighbor is strange, wait until you hear what these kings did with their power. Which of these rulers do you think was the absolute craziest? Peter III of Russia wasn't just eccentric. He was a grown man who refused to act like one. While ruling one of the largest empires in the world, he spent countless nights playing with dolls, not as a private hobby, but publicly, forcing his wife, the future Catherine the Great, and his entire court to participate. Each doll had a voice, a personality, and a story, and everyone had to act it out exactly as he commanded. Imagine standing at 2 in the morning, half asleep, whispering for a tiny toy soldier to charge across a table while the emperor glares at you. His obsession didn't stop there. He developed a strange fascination with Prussia, wearing their military uniforms, speaking German instead of Russian, and insisting that anyone or anything that reminded him of Prussia be treated with importance. At one point, a rat that had damaged his toy soldiers was put on trial in full military fashion. The court presented evidence, witnesses testified, and after the rat had been condemned, Peter III pardoned it, claiming it displayed proper Prussian discipline. This bizarre mix of childish obsession and imperial authority left everyone around him confused, humiliated, and powerless. His wife allegedly saw the threat in his unstable behavior and eventually took matters into her own hands. History notes that he died shortly after, officially from a health issue, but the circumstances seem less coincidental when you consider the chaos he inflicted on his own court. Peter III's story is a stark reminder that absolute power, combined with immaturity, doesn't just lead to odd habits. It can warp entire empires around the whims of a single disturbed mind. King Farouk of Egypt had everything a man could desire: wealth, palaces, luxury beyond imagination, but he found his greatest thrill in petty crime. Despite ruling a modern kingdom, he became obsessed with pickpocketing. Guests at state dinners would find their watches, wallets, or jewelry mysteriously missing, sometimes leaving a meeting only to realize the king had taken them. He called this skill the hand of the thief, and he practiced it obsessively, turning it into a game that gave him excitement far beyond any political triumph. His obsession didn't stop with theft. Farouk had an almost supernatural fixation on the color red. Hundreds of red cars in Egypt were his property, and anyone else who owned one risked losing it. He would confiscate red cars that appeared near his convoy, no matter who the driver was, even diplomats. In his personal life, he indulged in unimaginable excess. He required reinforced furniture, dined on entire menus, and demanded attention on an epic scale. His passion for indulgence extended to collecting pornography, insisting it was for education, amassing tens of thousands of items. Farouk was also extraordinarily overweight, his sheer size dictating how his environment operated. Chairs were modified, doors widened, beds strengthened. He was a living statement that extreme wealth without accountability doesn't just breed eccentricity, it breeds a whole ecosystem of absurdity and obsession. Behind all the humor and spectacle lies a chilling truth: a king so bored with power that his pleasures became crimes and his whims reshaped the lives of everyone around him. Farouk's story shows that sometimes the habits of kings aren't just strange, they're disturbingly disruptive. King Martin of Aragon, known ironically as Martin the Humane, met his end in a way so absurd it could be a scene from a dark comedy. After finishing an entire goose by himself, not just a portion, his court jester attempted to lighten the mood with a joke. The joke? A deer hanging by its tail from a tree because it had stolen figs. That was it. No clever punchline, no twist, just a strange image meant to amuse. But Martin found it so overwhelmingly funny that he laughed uncontrollably for 3 full hours. His body simply could not keep up. He laughed until he could not breathe, until his face turned purple, until he fell from his chair and died in front of his court. Imagine being the jester in that moment, responsible for a king's death, with a joke no one else would remember. The scene is both tragic and ridiculous, highlighting how fragile human life, and even the lives of the powerful, can be in the face of unbridled absurdity. Martin's death is a testament to the strange vulnerabilities of kings, whose excesses and indulgences often left them exposed in ways that ordinary people could never experience. It's a story that walks the line between humor and horror, demonstrating that even those at the pinnacle of power are not immune to the ridiculous and unexpected consequences of simple human moments. Martin's passing reminds us that sometimes history's most bizarre events arise not from war, politics, or betrayal, but from laughter itself, a laughter so extreme it can literally kill. Christian VII of Denmark was a king whose madness was impossible to ignore. Unlike others whose habits were private or peculiar, Christian's behavior was public, chaotic, and often violent. He would slap people randomly, including foreign diplomats during official meetings, and sometimes even guests at his own wedding were not safe from his unpredictable strikes. His nights were no less disturbing. He would run through the palace, smashing furniture and artworks, turning royal halls into chaotic arenas. But the strangest part was how he treated his dog. He officially declared it a government minister, expecting his court to follow its orders as seriously as their own. Meetings must have been surreal, official discussions with ministers, advisors, and a dog whose opinions supposedly mattered. Christian's bizarre whims extended to play and sport as well. He would challenge foreign ambassadors and courtiers to games like leapfrog during formal events, forcing people in suits and gowns to jump across palace floors at the king's command. This level of instability, combined with absolute power, created a court where no one was safe and nothing could be predicted. Diplomacy, decorum, and hierarchy meant nothing under his rule. Servants, advisors, and foreign visitors had to navigate a world where the king's pleasure dictated law, safety, and survival. Christian VII's life is a disturbing example of what can happen when mental instability and unchecked authority collide. Every slap, every chaotic night, every absurd decree paints a portrait of a king who had no filter between his impulses and the power of a kingdom. His reign proves that sometimes the scariest monsters in history wore crowns. King Ludwig II of Bavaria, also known as the Swan King, turned his life into a living fairy tale, blurring the line between reality and fantasy. Obsessed with medieval legends and the operas of Wagner, he constructed grandiose castles, including Neuschwanstein, which would later inspire Disney's Cinderella Castle. But building castles wasn't enough. Ludwig wanted to live in them as though he were the hero of his own stories. He dressed in full medieval armor or royal costumes, commanding his servants to do the same, and moved through his palaces as though performing a theatrical role. He created artificial caves with waterfalls and floating boats for private enjoyment, and even installed ornate slides to traverse his halls. He maintained a nocturnal schedule, sleeping through the day and ruling by night, forcing his court to adapt to his peculiar lifestyle. One of the most bizarre aspects of his fantasy life was the imaginary dinner parties he hosted. Places were set for long-dead monarchs, and he would hold full conversations with them, toasting their health and discussing politics. Servants were expected to serve these invisible guests, refill their glasses and clear empty plates, all while maintaining a straight face. Even minor imperfections, like a servant's clicking false teeth, could disturb his carefully curated atmosphere and result in punishment. Ludwig's obsession with fantasy and isolation illustrates how unchecked wealth and absolute authority can cultivate extreme eccentricity, where imagination overtakes practicality. His story is both enchanting and tragic. A brilliant mind lost in a world of his own making, incapable of interacting with the reality around him, yet leaving behind some of the most stunning architectural achievements in history. King Ludwig II of Bavaria, also known as the Swan King, turned his life into a living fairy tale, blurring the line between reality and fantasy. Obsessed with medieval legends and the operas of Wagner, he constructed grandiose castles, including Neuschwanstein, which would later inspire Disney's Cinderella Castle. But building castles wasn't enough. Ludwig wanted to live in them as though he were the hero of his own stories. He dressed in full medieval armor or royal costumes, commanding his servants to do the same, and moved through his palaces as though performing a theatrical role. He created artificial caves with waterfalls and floating boats for private enjoyment, and even installed ornate slides to traverse his halls. He maintained a nocturnal schedule, sleeping through the day and ruling by night, forcing his court to adapt to his peculiar lifestyle. One of the most bizarre aspects of his fantasy life was the imaginary dinner parties he hosted. Places were set for long-dead monarchs, and he would hold full conversations with them, toasting their health and discussing politics. Servants were expected to serve these invisible guests, refill their glasses and clear empty plates, all while maintaining a straight face. Even minor imperfections, like a servant's clicking false teeth, could disturb his carefully curated atmosphere and result in punishment. Ludwig's obsession with fantasy and isolation illustrates how unchecked wealth and absolute authority can cultivate extreme eccentricity, where imagination overtakes practicality. His story is both enchanting and tragic, a brilliant mind lost in a world of his own making, incapable of interacting with the reality around him, yet leaving behind some of the most stunning architectural achievements in history. Sultan Ibrahim of the Ottoman Empire, often called Ibrahim the Mad, ruled with a combination of paranoia, obsession, and cruelty that left his empire trembling. He had spent 22 years confined in luxury prisons as a prince, constantly fearing execution, and when he finally became sultan, he indulged every whim without restraint. Ibrahim had a bizarre obsession with fur, covering his surroundings with it and draping himself in sable furs, even during the hot summers of Istanbul. His personal appearance became legendary for its extravagance: heavy, jewel-encrusted clothing, perfume-scented beards, and a general aura of excessive opulence. But his eccentricities took a deadly turn with his obsession with women. He demanded that the largest, heaviest women in the empire be found and brought to him, giving them positions of wealth and authority, while at the same time he executed 280 of his concubines in a single night, tying them in weighted sacks and drowning them in the Bosphorus, convinced they had been unfaithful. One woman survived by freeing herself and was rescued by French sailors, providing the only account of this horrific event. His combination of fear, obsession, and absolute power made him unpredictable and terrifying. He could shift from indulgence to brutality without warning, and no one, not even his closest advisors, could anticipate his next act. Ibrahim's reign illustrates the danger of giving a paranoid and unstable mind complete control over a vast empire. His habits weren't just strange, they were catastrophic, reshaping the lives of thousands according to the whims of one disturbed individual. Emperor Qin Shi Huang of China was a man obsessed with immortality, and his paranoia shaped every aspect of his reign. He had already united China and built monumental achievements like the foundations of the Great Wall. But that was never enough. He feared death above all else. Desperate to live forever, he sent expeditions to mythical islands searching for elixirs of immortality. When these failed, he turned to alchemy, convinced that mercury could grant eternal life. He swallowed mercury pills, bathed in mercury, and even incorporated it into his tomb, not realizing that this poison was slowly killing him. His fear of assassination and death led to extreme paranoia. He never slept in the same place twice, had tunnels connecting all 270 of his palaces so he could move unseen, and had identical carriages travel in different directions to confuse spies. Anyone who revealed his location risked execution along with their entire family. He also attempted to erase history itself, burning almost all books that weren't about agriculture, medicine, or prophecy, and burying alive 460 scholars who protested. When he finally died at 49, his officials hid his death for 2 months, carrying his decaying corpse in a carriage surrounded by carts of rotting fish to mask the stench. Qin Shi Huang's life is a grim illustration of how fear and obsession can consume even the most powerful ruler. His quest for immortality destroyed his health, his peace of mind, and nearly erased history. The emperor who sought to live forever instead created a legacy of paranoia, cruelty, and cautionary tales about the dangers of unchecked power. King Adolf Frederick of Sweden met one of the most absurd ends in history, combining gluttony and foolishness in a way that seems almost comical, but deadly. On February 12, 1771, he sat down for what would become his final meal, and he approached it with Olympic-level excess. He started with lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, smoked herring, and champagne, and that was just the beginning. The main courses followed: more fish, more meat, more vegetables, and still he wasn't satisfied. Dessert was his favorite, the Swedish cream bun called semla. But Adolf Frederick didn't stop at one or two. He consumed 14 in a row, pushing his already overloaded body beyond its limits. As he finished, his servants watched in horror, unable to intervene as the king's body betrayed him. He stood, trying to regain composure, and collapsed instantly, dead. The official cause of death was listed as digestion problems, a polite euphemism for eating himself to death. It's both tragic and absurd, a king remembered not for his policies or victories, but for his inability to moderate his appetite. His legacy is a stark reminder of how indulgence and lack of self-control can overshadow even the most powerful lives. Adolf Frederick's story walks the line between humor and horror, illustrating that absolute power and endless access to resources can amplify even the most human weaknesses into something historically unforgettable. He wasn't cruel or insane, like some of the rulers before him. He simply took his desires too far, and history took note. His end remains one of the strangest cautionary tales of monarchy, proving that even kings aren't immune to the consequences of overindulgence. That brings us to the grim truth behind all these bizarre rulers. Absolute power amplifies human weakness, eccentricity, and sometimes outright madness. From Charles VI, who feared shattering like glass, to Peter III, who forced entire courts to play with dolls, and Farouk, whose boredom turned into pickpocketing and obsession with red cars, the list reveals a pattern. Martin of Aragon laughed himself to death, Christian VII turned slapping and leapfrog into governance, Caligula elevated his horse to senator, and Ludwig II hosted imaginary dinner parties for dead monarchs. Ibrahim drowned hundreds of women in a single night. Qin Shi Huang poisoned himself while chasing immortality. Adolf Frederick literally ate himself to death, and Henry VIII became a rotting, obese symbol of excess. These stories are more than historical curiosities, they are lessons. Power without accountability, wealth without restraint, and authority without checks produce extremes of behavior that ordinary humans cannot fathom. They warn us about the dangers of concentration of power and the fragility of sanity when unbounded privilege meets unchecked desire. History may remember them for wars, conquests, or architectural feats, but the bizarre, tragic, and grotesque aspects of their lives often tell a deeper story about human nature, obsession, and the corrupting force of absolute authority. Next time you encounter someone with too much influence, remember, at least they aren't turning their palace into a playground for dolls, drowning concubines, or trying to become immortal with mercury. Sometimes truth is stranger and darker than fiction. Which of these kings shocked you the most, and could you imagine living under a ruler like that? Comment below, because these stories prove that power without limits can make anyone completely unhinged.